August 13, 1704. A village in Bavaria called Blenheim. The Germans would mispronounce it as Blenheim, and that's the name history remembers. Two armies face each other across a marshy stream. On one side, the seemingly invincible France, the superpower of Europe, with their Bavarian allies. On the other, an English duke nobody thought could pull off what he was about to do. In 12 hours, 30,000 men would be dead or wounded. The blood would run so thick in the Nebel stream that soldiers couldn't drink from it. And the political map of Europe would be redrawn with corpses as the ink. This is the story of how one man's audacious gamble broke French hegemony and announced Britain as a world power. How the Duke of Marlborough, John Churchill, ancestor of Winston Churchill, executed one of the most daring strategic marches in military history, then fought one of the bloodiest battles of the 18th century. For decades, France under Louis XIV had dominated Europe. The Sun King's armies were the largest, best trained, and most feared on the continent. They'd won victory after victory. They seemed unstoppable. And in 1704, they were poised to knock Austria out of the War of Spanish Succession, which would have made France the undisputed master of Europe for generations. Nobody thought they could be stopped. Especially not by an English general leading a coalition army of English, Dutch, Austrian, and German troops. Forces that barely trusted each other and certainly didn't want to take orders from some English aristocrat. But Marlborough didn't just stop them. He crushed them so thoroughly that French military prestige never fully recovered. He proved that even superpowers can be beaten when they face someone willing to take impossible risks and execute perfect tactics. The Battle of Blenheim is the story everyone should know but hardly anyone does. It's not taught in American schools. It doesn't have the name recognition of Waterloo or Gettysburg. But it mattered more than almost any battle in European history because it answered a question the entire continent was asking. Can Louis XIV be stopped? The answer, written in blood on the fields of Bavaria, was yes. This isn't just military history. This is a masterclass in strategic boldness, coalition leadership, and what happens when an underdog refuses to accept that the odds are impossible. It's about a 50-something English aristocrat who looked at the most powerful army in Europe and said, "I can beat them." And then did. If you want to understand how underdogs beat superpowers, how audacity trumps caution, and how one battle can shift the entire balance of power, subscribe right now. Because the Battle of Blenheim is proof that impossible is just a word people use before someone makes it look easy. Let me take you back to 1704, to a continent at war, to an English duke marching an army 250 miles across Europe to save Vienna. To a battle so brutal that even the winners were haunted by it. To the day France learned they could bleed. This is Blenheim. And it's magnificent. To understand Blenheim, you need to understand how dominant France was in 1704. This wasn't a fair fight. This was David versus Goliath, except Goliath had been winning every fight for 40 years. Louis XIV, the Sun King, had been on the throne since 1643. He'd built France into a centralized, militarized superstate. His army numbered over 400,000 men, the largest standing army Europe had seen since the Roman Empire. He'd fought war after war, expanding French territory, intimidating neighbors, making France the undisputed hegemon of continental Europe. By 1704 he was trying to put his grandson on the Spanish throne, which would have united France and Spain under Bourbon rule and made French power unassailable for generations. Britain, Austria, and the Dutch Republic had formed the Grand Alliance to stop him, but they were losing. French armies had invaded Austria. Bavaria, a powerful German state, had allied with France. Vienna itself was under threat. If Vienna fell, the Austrian Habsburgs would be knocked out of the war, and the Grand Alliance would collapse. France would win. Game over. The only hope was an English general named John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough. Marlborough was 54 years old in 1704. He'd been a soldier since he was a teenager, fighting for decades, working his way up through a combination of military genius and political maneuvering. He wasn't born into the highest aristocracy. He'd married well, played politics brilliantly, and proven himself indispensable to whoever sat on the English throne. But here's the problem. He commanded a coalition army. English troops, sure. But also Dutch, Austrian, Danish, and German contingent. And coalition warfare is a nightmare. Every nation has its own objectives. Its own politicians second-guessing every decision. Its own generals who resent taking orders from foreigners. The Dutch, in particular, were terrified of casualties. Their deputies, civilian officials attached to the army, had veto power over Marlborough's decisions. They'd blocked him from taking decisive action before, preferring cautious defensive warfare to risky offensive campaigns. And what Marlborough wanted to do in 1704 was insane: march the army from the Netherlands across German territory, all the way to Bavaria, 250 miles, to link up with Austrian forces and confront the Franco-Bavarian army threatening Vienna, 250 miles, through territory they didn't control, with supply lines that would be impossibly stretched, away from their defensive positions in the Low Countries, to fight a battle in a region most of his troops had never seen. His Dutch allies thought he was crazy. His critics in London thought he was abandoning the defense of the Netherlands to chase glory. Even his supporters worried he was overreaching. But Marlborough understood something his critics didn't. France was winning because they were concentrated and aggressive. The Grand Alliance was losing because they were dispersed and defensive. The only way to win was to take the initiative, to force France to react to him rather than the other way around. So in May 1704 he lied. He told the Dutch he was marching his army to the Moselle River to threaten eastern France. They reluctantly agreed. Then he kept marching. Past the Moselle. Into Germany. Toward Bavaria. By the time the Dutch realized they'd been deceived, it was too late to stop him. This is the audacity that separates great commanders from cautious ones. Marlborough knew that if he asked permission for his real plan, he'd be told no. So he didn't ask. He just did it, and accepted that if he failed, his career was over and England would probably lose the war. The march itself was brilliant. Marlborough moved 40,000 men across Europe in just 5 weeks. He prepositioned supply depots along the route. He maintained secrecy about his destination. He kept his troops healthy and supplied, a logistical miracle in an age when armies typically lost more men to disease and desertion than to combat. By late July, Marlborough had linked up with Prince Eugene of Savoy and the Austrian army. Together they commanded roughly 52,000 men. Facing them, the Franco-Bavarian army of 56,000 under Marshal Tallet, one of France's most experienced commanders. The stage was set for a battle that would determine the fate of Europe. And Marlborough was about to gamble everything on one afternoon of violence. August 13, 1704, 8 a.m. The battlefield, a plain near the village of Blenheim, cut by the marshy Nebel stream. The Franco-Bavarian army held strong defensive positions. Marshal Tallet was confident. Why wouldn't he be? He had 60,000 men in well-prepared positions behind a water obstacle. Attacking across the Nebel would be suicide. Marlborough knew it looked impossible. That's exactly why he was going to do it. His plan was complex. Maybe too complex for coalition warfare where coordination was always the weak point. But he trusted his subordinates, particularly Prince Eugene, and he knew the French wouldn't expect a frontal assault across such difficult terrain. The battle opened with Marlborough ordering attacks on both flanks. On the right, English and Austrian troops under Lord Cutts attacked the village of Blenheim itself. The village was garrisoned by 12,000 French infantry, elite troops under experienced officers. The English infantry marched straight into point-blank musket fire. The volleys were devastating. Men dropped in rows. Officers fell. The attack stalled, then broke. The survivors retreated back across the stream. From the French perspective, this looked like validation. The English were brave but suicidal. They couldn't break the French defensive line. Victory was assured. But this was exactly what Marlborough wanted. Those 12,000 French troops in Blenheim were now fixed in place, defending the village. They couldn't maneuver. They couldn't reinforce the center. Marlborough had just removed a quarter of the French army from the battle, and they thought they were winning. On the left flank, Prince Eugene was attacking the Bavarians. This assault was even bloodier. Eugene's men were getting slaughtered. They took horrific casualties but kept attacking, kept the Bavarians engaged, kept them from shifting to help the French center. Both flanks were bloodbaths. Both attacks looked like failures. Which meant the French commander did what seemed logical. He concentrated in the center, confident his flanks were secure. That's when Marlborough struck. At 5:30 p.m., after 9 hours of fighting, after thousands already dead, Marlborough personally led a massive cavalry charge straight at the French center. 80 squadrons of cavalry, thousands of horsemen, thundering across the Nebel stream and up the gentle slope toward the French lines. This was the gamble. Everything depended on the French center breaking. If it held, Marlborough's cavalry would be destroyed and the battle lost. The French cavalry countercharged. The two forces met in a massive collision, thousands of men and horses crashing together in medieval-style shock combat that was already outdated by 1704 standards but still horrifically effective. For minutes that felt like hours, the cavalry melee was chaos. Sabers swinging. Horses screaming. Men falling under hooves. Neither side gaining clear advantage. Then Marlborough's infantry arrived to support the cavalry. The combined arms assault, cavalry and infantry working together, began pushing the French back. Slowly at first, then faster. The French center started to crack. Marshal Talon, watching his center collapse, tried to pull troops from Blenheim to stabilize the line. But the troops in Blenheim couldn't extract themselves. The English were still attacking. The French infantry was trapped in the village, unable to maneuver while their center dissolved. By 6 p.m. the French center had broken entirely. Marlborough's cavalry was riding through the gap, wheeling to attack the French flanks from behind. The Franco-Bavarian army was being cut in two. What happened next was slaughter. French infantry, caught in the open with cavalry behind them and infantry in front, broke and ran. Thousands tried to escape by crossing the Danube River. Most drowned, weighed down by equipment, panicked, trampled by their own comrades. The 12,000 French troops trapped in Blenheim village were surrounded. They had no escape. They'd been so successful defending the village that they'd failed to retreat when they had the chance. By nightfall, they surrendered en masse, the most humiliating defeat a French army had suffered in living memory. Marshal Talon himself was captured, found wandering the battlefield in shock. The French casualties: 20,000 dead or wounded, 14,000 captured. The Grand Alliance losses: 12,000 dead or wounded. But numbers don't capture the psychological impact. France, invincible France, dominant France, France that had won every major battle for decades, had been crushed. Their elite troops surrendered. Their marshal captured. Their army destroyed. The Sun King's armies could be beaten. And everyone in Europe now knew it. Marlborough had marched 250 miles, fought a battle everyone said was too risky, and won so decisively that French military prestige never fully recovered. The gamble had paid off. Impossible had become inevitable. And Europe would never be the same. The immediate strategic consequences of Blenheim were enormous. Bavaria switched sides almost immediately, abandoning France and joining the Grand Alliance. Vienna was saved, Austria would stay in the war. The threat of French hegemony over Europe was broken. Louis XIV, receiving news of the disaster, reportedly wept. For the first time in his 50-year reign, his armies had suffered a catastrophic defeat. The aura of French invincibility was shattered. The War of Spanish Succession would continue for another decade, but France would never again threaten to dominate Europe the way it had before Blenheim. For Britain, Blenheim announced their arrival as a major European power. For centuries, England had been a peripheral player in continental politics, important but not decisive. Marlborough proved that British arms, British leadership, and British gold could determine the fate of Europe. It was the beginning of Britain's rise to superpower status. Marlborough returned to England as a hero. Queen Anne gave him the royal manor of Woodstock and money to build a palace there. He named it Blenheim Palace, a monument to his greatest victory. It still stands today, one of the grandest country houses in England, birthplace of Winston Churchill over 2 centuries later. But here's where the story gets complicated, because victory doesn't always bring happiness. The War of Spanish Succession dragged on until 1714. Marlborough won more brilliant victories: Ramillies in 1706, Oudenarde in 1708, Malplaquet in 1709. Each battle was a tactical masterpiece. But the war never really ended the way the Grand Alliance wanted. France, though beaten repeatedly, couldn't be conquered entirely. Louis XIV refused to surrender, and his armies, though no longer dominant, kept fighting. By 1711, British politics had shifted. The Tory party, which opposed the war, came to power. They saw Marlborough as too expensive, too ambitious, too closely tied to the opposition Whigs. They accused him of corruption, the charges were probably false, stripped him of his offices and forced him into exile. The man who'd saved Vienna, who'd broken French power, who'd announced Britain as a world power, was driven from his own country by petty political enemies who resented his success. Sound familiar? Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal and died in exile. The Duke of Marlborough defeated Louis XIV and was forced from England in disgrace. There's a pattern here. Democracies and republics are terrible at honoring their military heroes once the immediate threat has passed. Marlborough was eventually allowed to return to England in 1714 after Queen Anne died, but his health was broken. He'd suffered several strokes. He spent his final years as a semi-invalid at Blenheim Palace, the monument to his greatest triumph also becoming the place where he waited to die. He died in 1722, age 72, mourned by his soldiers but largely forgotten by the political class that had once desperately needed him. The Battle of Blenheim's legacy is complicated. Militarily, it's studied as a masterpiece: the audacious march, the deceptive flank attacks, the decisive central breakthrough. It's taught at military academies as an example of how to win through boldness and combined arms tactics. Politically, it marked the beginning of the modern European balance of power. After Blenheim, no single nation could dominate the continent. Instead, coalitions would form to check any power that grew too strong. This system, born from the blood at Blenheim, would govern European politics until World War I. Culturally, Blenheim became a symbol of British military excellence. The British would remember it as proof that they could compete with continental powers, that their armies weren't just naval escorts but could win decisive battles on European soil. But here's what's often forgotten: 30,000 men died or were wounded at Blenheim. Thousands drowned trying to escape across the Danube. The Nebel stream ran red with blood. Villages were burned. Civilians fled in terror. War is glorious in paintings and poems. On the ground, it's just young men dying in the mud while old men argue about maps. If this story of audacity and betrayal resonates, smash that like button and share this video. Because Blenheim teaches us that bold action can change history, and also that history is rarely grateful to the people who change it. So what does an 18th century battle in Bavaria teach us about life in the 21st century? Everything about calculated risk, institutional resistance, and why playing it safe is often the riskiest choice of all. Marlborough's march to Blenheim is the perfect case study in strategic boldness versus tactical caution. In May 1704 he faced a choice: stay in the Netherlands, fight defensive battles, hope the situation somehow improved on its own, or march his army across Europe on a campaign everyone said was impossible, risk everything on one decisive battle, and either save the war or lose it completely. Safe choice versus bold choice. And he chose bold. Here's why that matters. Organizations, whether armies, companies, or governments, have a natural tendency toward risk aversion. Committees want consensus. Stakeholders want safety. Everyone wants someone else to make the hard decisions so they can't be blamed if things go wrong. Marlborough's Dutch allies were the perfect example. They had legitimate concerns about casualties, about expense, about leaving their homeland undefended. But their caution was leading to slow defeat. France was winning precisely because the Grand Alliance was too afraid to take risks. Someone had to break the pattern. Someone had to say, the safe path is actually the path to failure. We need to do something dramatic or we're going to lose by default. That's Marlborough. And you see this dynamic everywhere. Companies that stick with proven business models even as the market shifts around them. They're not stupid, they're risk-averse. They're protecting what they've built. But that protection becomes a prison. Kodak, Blockbuster, Nokia. Again, the same examples because the pattern never changes. Leaders who won't make tough decisions because those decisions might be unpopular. Who wait for perfect information that never arrives. Who mistake caution for wisdom when actually caution is just fear wearing a suit. Individuals who stick with jobs, relationships, or situations that aren't working because change is scary and the unknown is terrifying. Better the devil you know, right? Except sometimes the devil you know is slowly destroying you. Marlborough understood something crucial. The riskiest choice is often to do nothing. If he'd stayed in the Netherlands, Austria would have fallen, the Grand Alliance would have collapsed, and France would have dominated Europe for generations. Playing it safe would have guaranteed defeat. So he took the impossible option. And it worked. Not because he was lucky but because he prepared meticulously, coordinated brilliantly, and executed perfectly. Bold doesn't mean reckless. Bold means willing to act decisively when the situation demands it. But here's the darker lesson from Marlborough's story. Institutions hate the people who take necessary risks. Even when those risks succeed. Especially when those risks succeed. Marlborough saved the Grand Alliance. And within a few years, British politics had turned against him. Why? Because success makes people uncomfortable. It exposes the timidity of those who chose safety. It threatens people whose power comes from managing the status quo rather than changing it. Every organization has its Marlboroughs, the people who see what needs to be done, who are willing to take career risks to do it, who drive everyone crazy with their boldness and urgency. And every organization eventually punishes those people because institutions value stability over excellence. If you're that person, the one pushing for bold action while everyone else counsels caution, know that you're probably right. Know that history remembers the risk takers, not the committee members who killed their proposals. Know that you might pay a price for being right too early or too loudly. But also know, sometimes the boldest move changes everything. Sometimes marching 250 miles and fighting an impossible battle is exactly what the situation requires. The question is, are you brave enough to make that march? That's the story of Blenheim, the battle where the Duke of Marlborough gambled everything on one audacious campaign and broke French dominance over Europe. Where boldness beat caution. Where one man's refusal to accept impossible changed the course of Western history. August 13, 1704. 30,000 casualties. The end of French hegemony. The beginning of British power. All decided in 12 hours of brutal combat on a Bavarian plain. Next video I'm taking you to another impossible victory, but this one goes the other direction. A battle where the underdog had every advantage, every reason to win, and lost anyway because their commander made one catastrophic decision that destroyed everything. We're talking about the largest army ever assembled up to that point in history. Attacking an exhausted, outnumbered enemy. Fighting on their home territory with every geographic advantage. And they lost so badly that their empire never recovered. It's the ultimate cautionary tale about how even overwhelming superiority means nothing if leadership fails at the critical moment. But here's the deal. Military history isn't just about old battles. It's about patterns of decision-making, leadership, risk, and consequence that apply to everything we do today. If you click away without subscribing, these lessons fade back into obscurity. The strategies that changed history get forgotten. And we repeat the same mistakes because we never learned from the past. Don't let that happen. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Comment below. Are you more like Marlborough, bold risk taker, or his Dutch allies, cautious consensus builders? There's no wrong answer, but knowing which one you are will tell you a lot about your approach to life. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that playing it safe can be the riskiest choice of all. I'll see you in the next one. These battles aren't just history, they're lessons in how to win when everyone says you can't.